Good evening. Thank you for tuning in to Face to Face. I'm your host, Dennis Ward. Our guest this week is Tanya Talaga. Tanya is a journalist and author known for her work with the Toronto Star, where she often focuses on Indigenous issues and investigative reporting. She's been nominated for and won numerous awards. Most recently, she has released the national bestseller, Seven Fallen Feathers: Racism, Death, and Hard Truths in a Northern City. Tanya, thanks so much for taking the time to join us here on Face to Face.
Thanks for having me.
Rather than have me explain what Seven Fallen Feathers is about, I was hoping you might tell us a little bit about the book.
The book is about Thunder Bay, but the book is also about a story on Canada. The book centers on the deaths of 7 students from 2000 to 2011. The 7 students were from northern First Nations communities. They were from Anishinaabe-Aski Nation territories, 49 First Nations in northern Ontario, and they all were in Thunder Bay because they had to go to high school there because there were no adequate schools for them to go to. The 7 lost their lives while they were in Thunder Bay. 5 of them wound up in the waters surrounding the city, and 2 of them died in their boarding homes. The book really looks at what happened to them, how it is Canada's history of failure to identify nation-to-nation agreements, failure to address treaties, the residential school system, so many broken parts, and how that contributed to their death, and also to the racism that's faced in Thunder Bay every single day.
For myself, as somebody who spent a lot of time reporting in Thunder Bay, the book spoke to me, but as somebody who's a journalist from the Toronto Star, what was it that drew you to this?
Well, that's a really good question. I actually was drawn into the story in 2011 by Grand Chief Stan Bairdy. He was then the Grand Chief of Anishinaabe-Aski Nation. And I was up there in 2011 doing a story on the federal election. We had this conversation about why it is Indigenous people aren't voting in the North. I knew the answer to that, but I had pitched a story to my Southern editors about doing a piece on that for the election. And they thought it was a great idea, and they said, go up and talk to Stan. So I did, and I would ask him questions about the election, and Stan would look at me, and he would say to me, why aren't you writing a story about Jordan Labas? And we would go back and forward constantly. I would ask a question about the election. He would ask me, you should really be writing about this. And he would also say to me, Jordan's been missing for 70 days. We went back and forward for quite a while until I finally stopped. I put my manic Toronto journalist side to self and listened to what he was saying. And then he told me that 7 students had died or gone missing while at school in Thunder Bay since 2000. And when he said that to me, my ears just opened up wide. He took me to the spot where they had last seen Jordan at the Kaministiquia River. And when we went there, I couldn't believe it because I got out of his truck, looked at the river, and saw Mount McKay right there. And Mount McKay is the spiritual center of Fort William First Nation, and that's my grandmother's reserve. So the story really hit me hard, and I just couldn't believe that the story of the 7 wasn't making national news headlines across the country. I mean, if this was a story in Toronto, if this was a story in Ottawa, it would be, but I hadn't heard of this.
Was it difficult to get the audience and your editors in Toronto to allow you to carry on with a story like that, to get them interested in what was going on in this northern city?
Well, as you know, as a reporter, when you pitch a story, you better deliver the story, especially if you're traveling to go and write it. And that's what I had done. I still haven't turned in that story on the 2011 election. Luckily, my editors really took a chance, and they realized that this was a big story, and we did it upright. We had it on the front page when I returned, and we continued with the story for years, really. I would dive in and out of it. When I went to Queen's Park as a political reporter, I would have access to the ministers. I'd have access to the Attorney General. I'd have access to the Premier, who at the time was Dalton McGuinty, and I would constantly ask, why are you not holding an inquest into this? And we tried to push the story forward that way. So the Star did eventually get behind it.
Was there, all of these stories are tragic in their own ways, but was there one of the stories of the 7 students that really stuck with you?
They all stay with me. The first one, Jordan, stays with me because it was my first entry, and I was at the command center when he was missing. I remember meeting his parents. I remember standing at the river where he would be found within a month of me standing there. That story sticks with me, and also to the story of Reggie Bushy. Reggie Bushy was 15 years old when he was found in the water, and we've just had the 10-year anniversary of his death. It was on November the 1st, just this past November. And that story very much stuck with me because Reggie was found in the water with his brother, Ricky Strang. Ricky and I speak frequently, and I met Ricky and we walked the length of the McIntyre River, and he told me everything that happened to him and how he woke up in the water and he couldn't find his brother. That story stays with me. You know, there's parts of the book there I cry when I wrote it, and I still cry when I read it, and that definitely is one of them.
Those two stick with me as well. I was on the scene for both of them when they were pulled from the river, and two that definitely stick with me as well. It's been just over 2 years since the inquest into the deaths of the 7 students. Were there expectations for yourself for that inquest that, like you mentioned, had been called for so long?
You know, it's really hard. There were 145 recommendations. The inquest lasted for 8 months, I think over 200 witnesses and thousands of pages of testimony and exhibits. You would hope that more would have come out of it, to be honest. They're still trying to figure out what they're going to be doing with the waters, putting in lighting, putting in emergency buzzers to make sure that it's a safe area. The Bear Clan is now patrolling the area. That's volunteer searchers that are here in Winnipeg. That same idea has been transferred to Thunder Bay to patrol the water there. But we still have the problem that there are children, there are kids that have to leave their home 400, 500, 600 kilometers away and go to high school away from their families in Thunder Bay. I mean, it's remarkable to me that in this day and age, a high school education isn't open to every single child in this country that needs one. Instead, we have children that have to fly so far away from their homes and their families and their language. And to me, it really stuck in my mind that this is a parallel to the residential school system, and how for so many years, from the mid-1880s to 1996, 150,000 Indigenous people were put into these schools away from their language, away from their families, away from their culture, and in some aspects that is still happening.
Some of the deaths during the inquest or following the inquest were deemed by the jurors as undetermined. Mm-hmm. What were your thoughts as somebody who was looking into this when those came out? Often police were dismissing these cases as no foul play, nothing suspicious here.
Well, looking through all the evidence and talking to all of the people and speaking to the lawyers that were involved in this too, I think undetermined is the answer that they have, because I don't think that the investigations were done as properly as they should, and things seem to have fallen off. Often too, the inquest heard so much about press releases that were issued by police that said, you know, nothing to see here, no foul play suspected. And that just didn't happen with the death of the students. It also happened with the death of Stacey DeBungy, who is a 41-year-old Rainy River man who was also found in the water. And that was just a couple of years ago as well. And the same pattern emerged. It was actually from that case and from what had happened with the 7 that the provincial government in Ontario decided to step in and launch an investigation into the Thunder Bay Police.
And Tanya, we're going to get into some of that investigation, but first we've got to take a quick break, and then we'll be back to continue our conversation with journalist and author Tanya Talaga here on Face to Face. Welcome back to Face to Face. Our guest this week is journalist and author Tanya Talaga. Tanya has recently released the national bestseller, 7 Fallen Feathers, Racism, Death, and Hard Truths in a Northern City. And Tanya, before the break, we were discussing those jurors' inquest recommendations, and the 145 recommendations that you mentioned came out of there. Do you think those recommendations are being acted upon? Well,
the number one recommendation that needs to be acted on is the fact that these children need schools. They need proper schools. They need schools with gymnasiums. They need schools with cafeteria, properly trained teachers, and they need them in their communities, places that they can go to. That needs to happen. One of the recommendations that has happened is the Thunder Bay Police they have changed their missing persons protocol, and that's a step in the right direction, because one of the things that we hear from the families all the time is that when they phoned the police, their concerns weren't taken seriously. The very first boy to go missing, Jethro Anderson, when his Aunt Dora Morris called the police, she was told that, oh, don't worry about it, he's probably just out partying like the rest of the Native kids. That was the response that she got when she called to report her 15-year-old nephew missing. So hopefully the missing persons protocols are going to change and take it to greater effect in Thunder Bay. One of the other changes that has happened as well is that there is a gap week now in October, and I think that's really important, because when you look at the times when the kids went missing, it was in late October. I think that it's a pivotal point as well in the school year, because the kids have been there for almost 2 months at that point, and they get homesick. Before, they weren't going home till December. This time they have a week off. It starts around Thanksgiving, and that's important.
Any of the recommendations that stick out to you as needing acted upon in a hurry?
Well, Jordan's principle, that's always number one. There are still not equitable services for Indigenous kids in this country. When you look at education, healthcare, social services, that all needs to be rectified. That has been fought against. Poor Cindy Blackstock has been fighting this fight for over 10 years. There have been 4 non-compliance orders concerning this. That has to change. The education levels have to be brought up to a field so all kids in this country have the same chance and opportunity.
Tragically, as we know, shortly after the release of the recommendations, these incidents happened again, not with students, but with 2 youth, 17-year-old Tammy Kiash and 14-year-old Josiah Begg. Both went missing on the same night in May in Thunder Bay. Their bodies found about 2 weeks apart in the same Thunder Bay River. What went through your mind upon hearing that this had happened?
The news of May 6th really broke everyone. NAN was meeting at that point in Timmins for their annual summer meeting, and just as everyone was landing, they were getting news that this had happened, that there were 2 missing. And by the Sunday evening, they would find out that Tammy's body was to be found in the McIntyre floodway. She was 17, and Josiah, he was very young, he was 14 years old. It was devastating. Everyone connected to the 7 fallen feathers, the families, the communities, the police, the lawyers, everyone connected to this. Everyone broke when that news happened. You think after a 6-year lull as well, and after the inquest, it had been 6 years since Jordan had been found in the water, and then May 6th happened. It's devastating, and it continues to be devastating, because Thunder Bay is still in a place where children aren't safe.
Despite the recommendations, and the criticism over the years, police again were pretty quick to determine that there was nothing suspicious in the case of Tammy, and refused to even search the waterways at first with Josiah before the OPP finally sent in divers. Was that shocking to you that, we've had these recommendations and here we're seeing this all repeat again?
Sadly, no. It was like there were blinders on concerning Indigenous disappearances and deaths. Luckily, the York Region Police was brought in. They were brought in to investigate, and those investigations are still happening. The Ontario Chief Coroner, he was the one that brought them in, because Anishinaabe Nation and Grand Council Treaty Number 3, both of their leaders stood up and said, you know what, we do not want the Thunder Bay Police investigating these 2 deaths. No more. We've had enough. And so they held a press conference. They came down to Toronto. They held a press conference at Queen's Park, and they tried to get everyone's attention to say, we need a new police force to come in and to investigate these deaths. They actually asked for the RCMP to come in. But as it works, actually, that wouldn't work in Ontario. You have the OPP as our provincial force, and the leaders did not want the OPP also investigating these 2 deaths because of issues that they'd had in Treaty Number 3 area. And so it was the coroner that actually had an idea, thinking, well, you know what, let's bring in someone from the York Regional Police. And so detectives were brought in from there. And York Region is an area outside of Toronto. It's a large metropolitan area. It's got, it has experience with lots of different homicides and gang reporting, and so they were actually a good force to bring in.
As you mentioned, you know, there's investigations into the Thunder Bay Police Service, the Police Association,
Right.
separate investigations into the police chief and the city's mayor. Is this a Thunder Bay problem, do you think?
It is a Thunder Bay problem. It's a Canada problem as well. I mean, you could look at stories across Canada. You could look at Colton Bushy. You can look at murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. The same things are heard of over and over again. Concerns aren't taken seriously when Indigenous people call the police. There are communications issues. Nobody calls them back. Coroners don't phone them back, you know, and that's not just a Thunder Bay problem. That's a problem across the country.
What's been the reaction, though, in Thunder Bay to the book? You know, there's been people there, city officials, accusing national media of coming in and trying to embarrass the city. But, I mean, there's a lot of people under investigation in the city right now. Has there been much of a reaction from the common person up in Thunder Bay to the book?
You know, it's been interesting. I've been to Thunder Bay once since the book's been released. And it was actually a very warm event. On November 1st, we had a memorial walk from Dennis Franklin Cromartie High School, where 6 of the 7 kids went to school, and we went to the McIntyre River, and then the entire school came out. And members of the community, somebody posted the invitation on Facebook, so everybody came. And we did the walk. We went and had a traditional ceremony down by the water. Then we went and had a feast. And that was a good thing to do. It really was. And that was all the idea of actually Ricky Strang, Reggie Bushy's brother. Because when I was speaking to him about doing a launch in Thunder Bay for the book, he said, you know what, it's my brother's 10-year anniversary, and I think it would be something to do that would be really lovely if we were to remember him and the rest of the students. And so we did that. And during that time, too, it was interesting. The Thunder Bay Police joined us on the walk. Again, Ricky had said we should invite them. So we did. And so the acting police chief, she came. Also, too, one of the city councillors came when I spoke at the library, because the Thunder Bay Public Library, they've embraced the book. They have 13 books in circulation right now. They're adding it to their book club bag. They've been very, very generous with their support of the book. And regular people in Thunder Bay, non-Indigenous people, they've been okay. You know, I've seen some reviews on Goodreads, which is an internet site, and some of the reviews have been lovely. You know, there are some haters, but for the most part, everyone has been pretty receptive, and they've said to me, "You've captured this."
You know, as somebody who's been spending a lot of time there for a while, the mayor, the police refused to admit there was any sort of a crisis going on. There seems to have been a change in that mentality. They're trying to help out with the Matawa Housing Center there,
right.
looking at lighting around the rivers. Do you think the city itself has perhaps reached that turning point?
Maybe it has, you know. Maybe when the Thunder Bay Police Services Board, the Thunder Bay Police are being investigated, and also, too, the mayor, he's had legal problems as well. The police chief has also had to step aside for a while because of legal issues. I mean, like, it's not as if the national media is just woken up to this and is, you know, picking on Thunder Bay. I mean, there are some serious problems that are happening in the community, and I think that the community is very open at this point now to realizing, okay, you know what, we have to face this. And I think that they are. I hope that they are.
Tanya, we got to pause for another quick break, and then we'll continue our conversation here with Tanya Talaga on Face to Face. Welcome back to Face to Face. Our guest this week is Tanya Talaga, an award-winning journalist with the Toronto Star and author of 7 Fallen Feathers. And Tanya, as we mentioned, this book's been doing very well in terms of being on top 10 lists and getting some great reviews. A portion of each sale of the book goes to the Dennis Franklin Cromartie Memorial Fund, which financially assists Anishinaabe Nation students. Why did you want to include them in this all?
It's important to give back. It's important that they know that they're supported, and I also didn't want to be a story taker. It's important to me that everyone feels that they were a part of this book, because at its heart, this book is a story about love. It's a story about families that love their children and a community that loves their youth and their children. And they're trying to do everything they possibly can. I mean, it's Dennis Franklin Cromartie. It's a fantastic place. It's a wonderful high school, and they do everything they can constantly. And they need some help, And I remember listening in on the summer Chiefs meeting, the emergency one that happened at the end of June, when they were talking about, okay, well, what are we going to do in September after May 6th? Do we send our kids back? And all the chiefs are meeting to discuss that. And I remember Helen Cromartie stood up and she talked about the fund and how the fund needed to be replenished because the kids that were coming into school, they need help. And I thought to myself, that's a great idea. And Alvin Fiddler, the Grand Chief of Nan, he thought, that's a great idea. That's a good way to give back.
What was it like for you last week or recently to be back in Thunder Bay and at DFC and with those students shortly after this book coming out?
It was really, really wonderful, actually. My family was there as well. My 93-year-old grandmother was there. She's a member of Fort William First Nation. Her sister was there as well, my great aunt. My other aunts were there. My kids were there. It was really, I think, a cathartic event for all of us. Alvin Fiddler spoke. It was a lovely day. It was a nice time to come together, and we brought in 4 of the 7 families as well. That was very special. Walking with them, remembering with them, and holding a ceremony. I think it was important for all of us, and I hope it's something that we can continue to do going forward every year.
Tanya, what are your hopes for people reading this book?
I hope people understand. I hope that they open their eyes and their ears and their hearts to what's actually happening in the North. It's been happening there for a long time. Northern Ontario, to me, has had so many issues for so long, and only a few have really reported on it for a while. And now it feels like there's a national spotlight more concerning what's been happening in Thunder Bay. And I'm so happy to see that, because there's been a lot of injustices up there for a long time that have just gone on. It's important that that doesn't happen anymore, and it's important that that area of the province also gets some light shone on it.
Tanya, our thanks to you for joining us here on Face to Face, for writing the book and shining that light as well. That is all the time we have for today. We're always looking for new guests, so if you have any suggestions, please email us at news@aptn.ca. And a reminder, Face to Face is available as a podcast. You can find this episode and past episodes at aptnnews.ca/face-to-face podcast. Thank you for tuning in to Face to Face. I'm Dennis Ward.